Oh, there it is. Okay, we're back. Is that good? Okay. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, yeah, go ahead and do it. Do that.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello everybody and welcome to the first session of the second edition of the School of Data Journalism. We were here last year and we're very, very pleased to have been invited back. Steve, who's about to do this workshop, was so popular, he's doing it again. The School of Data Journalism last year was timed to coincide with the launch of the Data Journalism Handbook. Since then, we've seen an enormous growth in the number of organisations and the number of individual journalists taking up these new techniques and methods. We've got a series of 8 sessions, 4 panels and 4 workshops for you over the series of the week. This is the first, and the next one will be at 6 p.m. This evening in Hotel Brufani in the main room, talking about the state of data journalism and what's changed over the last year. I'm just going to hand over to Liliana to say a bit about the EJC. My name is Lucy Chambers and I work for the Open Knowledge Foundation, and together with the European Journalism Centre we're helping to coordinate the School of Data, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Lucy. I am Liliana Băunegru. I am leading data journalism activities at the European Journalism Centre. We've been working over the past 2 years to enable more journalists around the world to use data to improve reporting. So you might know about our website, datadrivenjournalism.net, where we publish updates about developments in the field. Or about the Data Journalism Handbook, which was launched here last year and published by O'Reilly Media in July last year. Lucy, do you want to? Oh, could we have the slide? The bit.ly. We want to share a few links to resources that we will be posting throughout this event. Yeah, so we will be reporting live from all the sessions of the event. We will be publishing articles, tutorials, and interviews on datadrivenjournalism.net and schoolofdata.org. So keep an eye on those websites. Also,
open this up.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted?
Yes, just scroll.
Okay.
If you could scroll down.
I'll let you control it.
Sorry about it. Right. So we will be posting all the Steve Doig's tutorial will be posted on datadrivenjournalism.net and schoolofdata.org after this session. We are reporting live on Twitter also. So if you want to stay updated with everything that's being discussed in the sessions, please follow the hashtag DDJSchool and also tell us what you learned from the sessions and what you think about the event by using this hashtag. So I'll hand over to... Right. One more announcement, one more logistical detail. The participants from last year's edition suggested having certificates of attendance. So if anyone wants to have a certificate, please come to me and Lucy after the session, and we will write your name down so we can provide you with a certificate by the end of the event. So that's all with the logistics. I'll now hand over to Steve to start the tutorial.
Thank you, Liliana, and thank the European Journalism Center for my opportunity to come here. First thing I have to say is buongiorno. Unfortunately, that will be all the Italian I will use today. I'm a typical American who knows only English. I'm always embarrassed when I come to Europe and I meet so many people who speak so many different languages, but that's what you'll have to deal with. I will try to speak slowly and clearly, but if you find that there's something that you don't understand that I've said, just somebody yell out, "Steve, slow down," or "Steve, explain." So don't worry about it. Okay, let me get my little slideshow started here. Okay, happily we have Wi-Fi here in San Gallo. Last year we didn't, so this year we do. You can see the URL up at the top is where I have put some data that we're going to use today. So if you'd like to follow along when I talk about that, please do. In addition, there's other information that I've put up on there, and I'll probably add some more. But one of the things is it's basically a tutorial for the things that we will cover today. That first link up here, first file, using Excel to do precision journalism. It's about 10 pages, and it will go over basically the same things that I'm going to talk about here. So if I do go too fast and you're having trouble keeping up, you can always download that, download the data files, and do the same thing at your own speed later, okay? What I'm going to do first today is talk about just sort of give you an overview of what data journalism is, and talk a little bit about Excel, the program that we will use for the exercise today. Once I have talked for probably 20, 25 minutes, half an hour or so, then we'll spend the rest of the hour and a half that we have working with a couple of different data sets that I found actually on your national statistics site here in Italy. My goal today is to show you that it's actually very easy to find interesting data, to pull it into a program like Microsoft Excel, and then use the tools of Microsoft Excel to find stories. I mean, that's really what we're all here to do, and that really, to me, is the power of data journalism. So let me dive into that, okay? So database journalism, this is what we're doing. And like all journalists, what we're trying to find is, the story. One of the terms we use in the United States is the smoking gun, the thing that tells us the answers, helps us find the story and helps us zoom in to know what kind of story we want to talk about. So let me start with the basics. Why use data at all in stories? Before computers came along and before reporters started doing data analysis, we often wrote our stories based on simply on anecdotes, on examples of the problem we're looking at. For instance, if we were doing a story about the problem of drunk driving, people drinking and then driving and then killing people in auto accidents, before the computer came along, we would probably find a particularly bad example of such an accident, and we'd give some details of that, and then we would talk about the larger problem, but we wouldn't have any real details about the larger problem. We would just sort of imply that drunk driving was a problem in society. The nice thing about data journalism is it lets you go beyond anecdotes to actual evidence. It lets you put evidence into your story. And so if you can get a database of people who have been arrested for drunk driving with details about them, with information about their age and their gender and the time and the date that they were arrested and whether there was an accident involved and what their blood alcohol level was and so on, you can use the computer to find the patterns of that and let you talk about things like how many drunk driving accidents occur on average, and how many people are arrested each night for drunk driving, and what the what the patterns are. Is this a problem more of men drivers or women drivers? What is the age? Is it young drivers who tend to be caught drunk driving, or are they older ones? Those kinds of questions can be asked and answered using data in a way that we really couldn't do before data journalism came along. So it's a powerful way of doing things. One of the other names for data journalism is precision journalism. And I like to think of precision journalism as social science done on deadline. We're doing things where we're analyzing elections, or we are looking at problems of inequality, poverty and wealth, and how it's separated in society. Those kinds of things are what social scientists would examine, but data lets us, reporters who typically aren't social scientists, it lets us tackle the same kinds of problems and do stories about that. And we get to do it on deadline. So when academics write studies about these problems, it often takes them months and months to gather the data, to analyze it, to write up their results, to submit it to academic journals, to have peer review. All these things are going on, takes a long time. For journalists, we can very often, at the beginning of the week, decide to do a story like that, and by the end of the week actually be publishing it and having it read or seen by thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens. So we're really doing our job when we do that. I keep talking about data. So what is data? Data really is a way of organizing information. That's really what data is organized information. There's lots of things that are information, but information that is in table form. In other words, rows and columns of information, where the columns are the variables that you have. Things like, name and date and sex and address and age. Those kinds of things would be the variables, the column names. And each row is a record or an instance that we're looking at. And it doesn't matter whether we're looking at crimes by city or auto accidents where we're naming each victim as a row in it. There's all kinds of things that can be data. Here's an example of information that isn't data. Okay, information. To turn this into data, you would put it into some kind of table form. Now it has become data, and along with other kinds of things. And if you imagine a table like that, you can start using it to ask and answer questions, and that's really what we're talking about here. So where do you get data? Where does data come from, particularly for journalists? And there's a variety of ways to deal with it. One of the ways is dealing with the various kinds of open records laws that different countries have. I know it is a common belief, particularly among European journalists that I've talked to, that in the United States it's extremely easy to get government information. That all we have to do is just sort of call up a government agency, say, send over your data, and they quickly send a limousine over with a big pile that they just hand to us. It's not quite that easy. We do have very strong public records laws, but sometimes we still have to go to court to fight for our data. But that's basically the result of years and years of reporters in the United States pushing for that kind of access, insisting that data that has been gathered by the government at the cost of taxpayers, in other words, taxpayer dollars, or in your case, taxpayer euros, are why governments can collect all this data that they have. So my feeling is it's owned by us. We who are taxpayers, we own the data, and we have every right to ask government to give it to us. Here in Europe, you actually have what to me is a very interesting movement to gather this kind of thing and to push for open access of data. The nickname for it among a lot of investigative reporters here is wobbing. And we can thank our Dutch investigative journalists for coming up with that term. It's actually an acronym for this, which I couldn't pronounce properly, so I won't try. But it basically means Open Government Act. And if you go to that website, you will find lots of good information about the open government laws in different countries and about journalists who are pushing for data access, who have begun to pressure governments to release information for the public good, who've gone to court to get it, and so on. So it's a good resource if you are trying to get this kind of data. Other places to get data. Italy has a very good national statistics site, Istat. You can go on there, you can select a whole variety of different themes, different kinds of data, download it as tables. In fact, it has links to download it as Excel. You can pull it right into a spreadsheet like we will talk about today. Other ways to get data. You can make a direct request to an agency. Just like you probably are already used to getting documents. You know, as journalists, you can go to a government agency. If you know that a particular document exists, you can make a request for it, and given a certain amount of pressure, it may take some pressure, you can get the data in document form. But when we're doing data journalism, we want more than just pieces of paper. We want this information to be on electronic formats, somehow that we can pull directly into a computer without having to retype it all. And there's no reason why government can't do that, because not only are we journalists all using computers, so is the government. All the information, any form that you have ever filled out for the government, whether you are getting, you're getting public assistance, or you've had a crime happen to you and you had to fill out a police form, any of those kinds of things, all that is being entered into computers. And once it's in somebody's computer, it can be pulled back out in a form that you can use. So one of the real tricks is learning what kinds of information are being gathered by different agencies, and then learning to make a request for it. I've talked to some people who've gone so far as to actually build their own data, and that was actually much more required some years ago, particularly here in Europe when investigative reporters were starting to learn about data journalism. Often, I know several reporters who did things like go to the different police stations in their city and gather by hand information about crimes that were occurring in each of the police districts and building that into a spreadsheet and doing their own analysis. That's very hard work, and it's very labor intensive, and it'll take time. These days, what we more often want is access to data that's already in database form that the governments have gathered. So a whole variety of different ways of getting data. Quick history lesson about data journalism. We are talking about data journalism a lot in the last few years. It's certainly been a big topic. A great reason why is the efforts of the European Journalism Center to raise this to attention, particularly to journalists all over Europe. In reality, it's been going on a long time. As far back as in the early 1960s in the United States, there were one or two reporters who did very early data journalism projects where they looked at things like how racial minorities in the United States were being mistreated by the courts in terms of sentencing, where minority defendants were getting harsher sentences than white defendants for the same kinds of crimes, basically by taking data from the criminal justice system, studying it in computers. The problem back then is the computers were those big mainframe computers that you've seen in old movies, the kind of thing where a whole room is filled with big machines, and there are tape drives that are spinning, and men wearing white lab coats are the ones who run it. Luckily today, every one of the laptops that I see scattered out in the audience are far more powerful than those big multi-million-dollar mainframes of the past. So you have the hardware now to do almost any kind of data journalism project. It started a little bit in the 1960s. One of the big turning points was the publication of this book, Precision Journalism. A reporter named Phil Meyer wrote this. He had learned how to do various kinds of social science techniques, things like public opinion polling and using statistical tools. And so he wrote a book arguing that journalists ought to be using those kinds of tools too. He wrote it in 1972, which was about 10 years too soon, because still back then we didn't have all these nice machines that we could get our hands on. So to do some of the things that he was talking about required access to those big mainframe computers. But a number of reporters back in the 1970s read Precision Journalism and began thinking about how this might be applied. Starting in around 1980 or 81, the personal computers started appearing. And a handful of reporters, the ones that I know about at least were in the US, bought machines like the Apple II, or in my case, I bought an Atari 800. I bought it, to play with at home. It was just kind of a gadget that I was learning, as a hobby. But I began to realize I could make that gadget help me do my job better as a reporter. By then I was working for the Miami Herald, and it helped give me a tool that made me a better reporter. So through the 1980s, a growing number of reporters were beginning to experiment with using personal computers, whether it was the Atari 800 or the IBM PC, those kinds of machines, and getting data and using it for stories. One of the major events that really made data journalism take off was in 1989, when a young reporter named Bill Dedman, working in Atlanta, Georgia, did a story about how black residents of Atlanta were being discriminated against when they went to banks to try to get a loan so that they could buy a house. The black residents were telling the newspaper reporters, I've got a good income, I've got a good job, I make a reasonable salary. I went to a bank, asked to borrow money, and they came up with reasons why they wouldn't give me a loan. The banks always had a good reason why any particular person they turned down should have been turned down. But what Dedman did is he realized there was a register, a check register, that the banks were required to keep. Anytime anybody went to a bank in Atlanta and asked for the papers to fill out to get a loan, the banks had to keep information about who each person was. Not their name, but information like their race, their gender, their income, the amount that they wanted to borrow, the location of the home that they wanted to buy, and then finally information about whatever the bank decided. Did they give the loan? Did they turn it down? Did the person decide not to go through with it? Whatever. So what Dedman did was got all these things. Back then it was just on paper, so he got all these pieces of paper, brought them back to the office, had them all typed into the computer. We're talking thousands of pieces of information. And then used the computer to find the pattern of these decisions by the banks. And he found things like a black resident of Atlanta had to have almost twice the income of a white resident just to get the same size loan. So there was this clear discrimination that was going on that was proven. The evidence of the numbers proved what was happening. And the banks could no longer argue that any particular person should be turned down because it was so clearly just race was what was the motivation in it. So anyway, he exposed this practice. Dedman won a Pulitzer Prize for this project, and it caught the attention of investigative reporters all around the country who began to realize that there were some stories that only could be done using data and computers. Probably the next big thing that really sealed the deal was Hurricane Andrew when it hit Miami, where I was working at the Miami Herald. And at the Herald, we did a big project looking at the damage patterns from Hurricane Andrew. and used data to help show that the scale of the disaster, the reason it was so bad, was not that it was an act of God, but it was really our own stupidity. We had allowed building codes over the years to be weakened, less and less and less, until finally a big hurricane came and tore things down. But again, it was the data and the computer that let us explore that problem, because we were looking at numbers like this. We had 80,000 homes that were damaged that had to be studied. We had millions of building inspection records that had to be looked at. We had tens of millions of dollars worth of campaign contributions that we wanted to study to show the influence of the building industry on the politicians that were making these decisions, and so on. So again, this is another story that could not have been done without the help of the computer. There's no way that I, as a reporter, could have gone through 80,000 pieces of paper describing the damage of each house, whereas the computer can do it quickly. So since then, data journalism has grown dramatically. I first started doing these kinds of talks here in Europe about 15 years ago. At the time, there were very few journalists who were looking at this, who were beginning to do these kinds of things. So I and other reporters who were doing data journalism began to spread the word, particularly around Europe. And I'm amazed every time I come back, every couple of years when I come back here, it always amazes and gratifies me about how much additional interest and how many great things are being done here. So, 15 years ago, I would say European journalists were way behind what the U.S. is doing. Today, not so much. I think you all have done a great job at catching up. Couple of big data stories, just to give you examples of the kind of thing that can be done. USA Today, one of our big newspapers, did a look at cheating in school testing. The United States, actually under President Bush, had pushed a program called No Child Left Behind. And the idea behind it was the teachers would get bonuses in schools where student test scores got better. And they wouldn't get bonuses. They might even get fired in schools where the students weren't doing better. What could possibly go wrong? Well, obviously it created a environment where cheating became a strategy. And by using data analysis, papers like the Dallas Morning News and others began to look at local examples of this kind of cheating. And then finally, USA Today did a big national study showing that there were hundreds of schools around the country where people were, basically the teachers were doing the cheating. They were changing the test scores for these students. In the United Kingdom, the Guardian newspaper has been doing great data journalism. One example is their analysis of the spending, the expense accounts of members of Parliament. They exposed all kinds of abuses, and several members of Parliament had to resign because of what they did. I recently was involved in a big study with California Watch, looking at fraud in hospital billing. This was a real big data project. The data set that I was working with had over 50 million records in it. It seems like a lot, but I did the analysis on a little Mac Mini, sitting in my office on a little Mac Mini, and be able to process without any difficulty, and certainly in seconds, these giant records. Here in the EU, among the great data stories was one done by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, looking at the fishing subsidies that the EU was paying to various people and how they're being misused. How it's supposed to be just for small businesses, small fishermen, and how in many cases it's actually very large groups that are using the money. So lots of big stories being done around the world now. This is no longer just something that just Americans do. Data journalism can be used for all kinds of stories, not only investigative stories, but things where you're looking at how government spending is being done, budgets and taxes, crime patterns, You know, I mentioned school test scores, auto accident patterns, you name it, all these kinds of things. It's also not for investigations only. It can be used for daily stories. It can be used for feature stories. Probably one of the best read computer-assisted stories I ever did involved taking the dog license database for Miami and processing it in the computer and producing a feature on the most popular breeds of dogs in Miami and the names of the dogs and so on, all showing that, you know, basically people aren't very creative. You know, in Miami there were hundreds of collies named Lassie, for instance, and hundreds of bulldogs named Winston, all that kind of thing. So, you know, and again, it was one of those stories where everybody read because everybody's sort of interested in their pets. I'll also add that sports is a great area for data journalism. Sports produces lots of data, lots of numbers, you know, scores and performance and things like that, and you have readers who care about that. So, you know, applying data journalism tools to sports is a very strong thing. So what kind of tools are there for data journalism? Here's some examples. We're going to talk about Excel as probably the primary tool. It's the thing that will let you do most kinds of things that you will want to do with data journalism. Sometimes you have to go beyond it. You may need a database program like Access or SQL Server. You know, Excel will do analysis of data tables that are up to about 1 million records. So it really is, you know, something that you're unlikely to run very often into things with more than that. But if you do need something more, Access will handle millions of records, so lots more than that. Access also will let you bring two tables together and create actually new information. The example I always use is if you have a table, a list of all the people that have been arrested for drunk driving. They've gotten fines or whatever for driving while drunk. And this table includes, you know, not only their name and so on, but their driver's license number. And then you get another table of all the people who are school bus drivers. And it will include information about them plus their driver's license number. You can take those two tables into Access, bring them together, and you will get the school bus drivers who are being arrested for drunk driving. Those are probably people that shouldn't be school bus drivers, and so on. Mapping programs, you know, almost every story we do and almost all the data we gather has location in it. You know, whether it's an address or a city or the postal code, even latitude and longitude is showing up these days in these kinds of things. If you have that kind of table, you can make maps of it. You can make data maps that show you the geographic pattern of what you're seeing. So imagine a crime map of your city where you have you know, red hotspots showing where the most crimes are occurring. That kind of thing is easy with data journalism. There are more powerful tools for dealing with data that you sometimes need. Things like SPSS for doing statistical analysis, for instance. A text editor is good for looking at the data to see whether it needs to be cleaned up. And these days, many people are become interested in what's called social network analysis, not only on things like Twitter and so on, those are sort of social networks, but looking at the connections between people who are involved in stories. The Washington Post, after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, did a very interesting diagram of the connections between the plotters of the 9/11 attacks and their network of other people who were supporting them. They gathered all this information, and you could see these different nodes of plotters and how they were working together. So social network analysis is good. So that's all on the analysis side. There's also presentation tools, and here at the School of Data Journalism, there are several of the workshops that are going to be done on data visualization, how to not only take the analysis that's being done, but actually make interesting ways of helping readers and viewers understand those same patterns. There's really some extraordinary stuff being done that way. So I keep talking about patterns, and that's really what we're doing with journalism, with data journalism. We're taking data, we're looking for the pattern that is in it, the pattern that is going to find that smoking gun that I've been talking about. We're also interested in what are called outliers. These are data points, kind of data that actually are behaving differently than everybody else. You know, the ones that are all the same, that's something worth looking at. But the ones that are at the extremes, that are the best or the worst, you know, the most or the least, that kind of thing, that's really what we journalists are interested in. We're not so much interested in the averages. We want to know what the extremes are like. And using good data analysis, you can find those outliers, the ones that are behaving differently than other people, and then finding out why. So I mentioned before, Excel is kind of the data power tool that will do most of what you want to do. If you get to the point where you have become good with using Excel, where it'll help you start thinking about data as a source for your stories, you may get to the point someday where you realize you have to go beyond Excel for something else. You know, you have a much larger data set or something. But I guarantee you, 80 to 90% of anything you will ever do in data analysis side of computer-assisted reporting can be done using Excel. And there's actually some fairly simple tools, and that's really what the rest of this workshop is going to be about, is showing you those tools. So let me give you a good, fast walkthrough of the things that Excel will do, and then we will actually do those once I finish flipping through these slides. Okay, this is a blank spreadsheet. I'm sure many of you have used Excel to some degree or another, so this shouldn't be a surprise. But it's basically a way of holding a table. You have columns that are labeled with letters and rows that are labeled with numbers. And in each of those cells will be some kind of information. Okay? It's actually a very big spreadsheet, or a very big, think of it as a piece of paper, a smart piece of paper, but it's really big. Again, it goes beyond 20, it goes down to more than a million rows. Same thing with the columns. There's as many as 16,000 columns of data can be included. Believe me, you'll never run into a data set where you need 16,000 columns. So it's really this, you know, sort of huge piece of paper that puts all this information on it. What are the things Excel can do? It can bring in data in a whole variety of different formats. You don't have to get your data already in Excel format. Excel can read old DBase format. It can take print files that are produced by other kinds of programs. It can even take HTML. If you find a table on a website someplace, you can actually select it, hit copy, go over to Excel and paste it in, and very often it will all flow and line up in the columns properly. So it has become a very useful tool in bringing in data of all these different kinds. So importing the data is easy, and there are tools for that. One of the most useful things you can do with Excel is sort data. The most kinds of things that you get on paper tend to be in what I would call the least interesting order possible. And that's alphabetical. Okay? Alphabetical is only good for looking something up. So, but it doesn't tell you those things that we like to know, like who's the most and who's the least, who's the best, who's the worst. We want to change our data into some other order that is more journalistically interesting. And Excel sorting will let you do that. Filtering is another thing that Excel will do. You know, very often we're working with data sets that have not just hundreds of rows, may have tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of rows. It's too much to look at. You know, we can't find a pattern. We can't find the things we're interested in that large. You know, it's like finding particular trees in a big forest. Sometimes we only want to see the trees that we are interested in. And filtering lets you do that. You can tell Excel basically to hide everything else except the things that I want to see. And I'll show you how to do that with Excel here shortly. Excel will also let you, I call it transform data. You can take the variables that you have and using some simple functions, you know, a little bit of easy math. You can create new variables. You know, for instance, you can take crimes, and this is one of the things we'll do here shortly. You can take raw numbers of crimes, divide by the population, and create a new variable called crime rate that will let you actually make fair comparisons between places of different size. And Excel will very quickly do that. Excel, you know, has a whole variety of those, and I'll talk more about those here in a second. Pardon me. Summarizing data is another thing that Excel will do very well. Very often we have data that is in categories, whether the categories are geographical, like different states or provinces, or whether it's, pardon me, or whether it is things like gender or race or age groups or any of those kinds of things. Sometimes we want to know how those categories break out, what the patterns of the categories are. And again, Excel has tools in there that will let you collapse your data down by categories and count by categories or produce averages or whatever. And we'll do that here in just a second as well. Okay, importing data. Here's various kinds of things that Excel can import. It has a wizard. Excel has lots of wizards to do things, but basically the data import wizard will walk you through the steps necessary to import different kinds of data, even if it's not in a true XLS or XLSX kind of format. Okay. Here's an example of what one of the text formats that you might run into will look like. You know, it's sort of a mess. Things aren't lined up neatly. In fact, this is what's known as tab delimited. There are tab stops between each of the fields. And just looking at it, it's kind of a mess. But Excel can recognize the tab stops and line it all up so it goes nice and neatly into Excel. Okay, so that's just one example of various kinds of formats that Excel can deal with. Sorting a table. It's actually very easy. Here's some data. Actually, this happens to be Portuguese crime data, but the stuff I have for you guys is Italian. But when you want to sort, all you have to do is put your cursor in the column that you want to sort by. In this case, crimes. You hit a button. In fact, the buttons, see these buttons up here? Depends on the version you have. Unfortunately, Excel keeps tinkering with the look of their version, so different things can be different. But if you hit the Z to A button, for instance, after you have the cursor there, it will take all that data, turn it into a different order, about as fast as you just saw it happen here. And whoops, let me back up here. And now we see, no surprise, Lisbon has the most crime, and so on. Okay. Pardon me. I arrived in Oslo. I guess it was 5 weeks ago. Traveling around, I've hit snow, rain, snow, rain. That's pretty much been the weather that I've seen. So I'm very happy to be here in Perugia, where it's actually lovely. But I picked up a cold in doing it. Okay, so you can sort. Filtering is the next thing. Okay. And to filter with Excel, you go under Data, and one of the choices is Filter, and you click on Auto Filter. And when you do that, these little buttons, see these buttons here? Those appear. And then you can use choices under those buttons, as you see here, to pick what you want. So if you wanted to pick a particular one of these places, you would just click on it, and you would see only the ones that you wanted to see, okay? So in this case, we wanted to see only the Lisboa region, and that's all we see. And notice that that all the other rows have disappeared. Yes, ma'am. Okay, sure. And I'll show it again when we do it, and you guys will get to do it as well. But in this case, you would have clicked on the little button on region, and that would show you the different choices you have. And then you pick one of those, and in this case, I'm picking the Lisboa one, and then only Lisboa is seen, okay? But we're going to do that here shortly. Again, let me add also that the handout that is on my website will walk you through all of these as well, So I know we're moving quickly through this because we want to actually start using data. The transforming data portion of this. There are various kinds of math functions where you can do simple things like adding and subtracting, multiply, divide, and so on. It will also produce, it'll calculate averages or medians, even fancier statistical things, and so on. So a whole variety of math functions. It will work with date and time. You can use Excel, for instance, to calculate the number of days between two different dates, or even the number of minutes between two different times, which can produce useful stories. There are text functions that will let you pull pieces of text out of larger pieces, combine them together. You know, let's say you have data that has first name, last name in it, and you want to break that into 2 columns. Rather than having to retype all that, you can use some simple text functions to pull those out. Excel, another wizard is its function wizard, and if you click on that little F of X button up there, you will get something that looks like this, that lists all the functions. So even if you're not sure, or if you haven't done this in a long time, you can always pull up a menu and wander through it until you find the function that actually will do the thing that you're looking for. So it's very useful. Finally, summarizing data. And this, again, is the idea of having, you know, a large mass of things, and you want to be able to organize it by categories. And that's kind of what's going on with this little picture here. So how we do it. Here's an example of Italian crime data, broken out, you know, listing the provinces here. But let's say what we really wanted was the number of murders by region, okay? Now, one way to do that would be to sort by region and then create subtotals by region. You'd have to add up each one and pull it out and so on. And that would be, that'd be kind of a problem. But again, here we have that data, the same data I showed you. Our question is how many murders occurred in each region. And what I tell my students to do is kind of visualize the piece of paper that would answer your question. So in this case, the piece of paper that would answer the question would be a column naming each of the regions, and then next to it, the number of murders, okay? So here's how you do it. You would build the pivot table. If you go under data, there's a choice called PivotTable, and we'll do that here in a couple of minutes. You would get a sheet that looks like this. Your data is still there. It's on another sheet. You would take region and put it down here in row labels, and you would take murders and put it over here in values, and it would look like this. So again, I put region down here and murders down here, and instantly I get this. Notice that this table now is just the regions, and it has totaled up the number of murders for each of those regions. Okay? And then you can even sort that so that you see, again, we're journalists. We want to know who's the worst right away. Okay? So clearly, Campania, be careful there. Okay? Don't say bad things to anybody there. Okay. Quickly, some data journalism resources to go to after we're through here. One of the best is what Liliana mentioned before. This was created by a group of journalists who got together. I think the idea came out of MozFest, wasn't it? And then was announced just a few months later here in Perugia. And a collection of, I think it was more than 60 reporters involved in putting it, is that about the right number? Quite a number of people, you know, contributed case studies and different kinds of chapters and so on. Great book, and the price is right. If you go to here, you can download it for free. Okay, there is no excuse for any good journalist not getting this and reading through it. It's filled with great examples of data journalism, and many of them are international. This is not just another book that is all about the United States. Okay, so I urge you to get Data Journalism Handbook at datajournalismhandbook.org. Other places to find help, to get training, and so on. Again, European Journalism Center. Not only this school of data journalism, but other workshops and tutorials that they have organized. You know, here in Europe, I would say the EJC is the leading proponent of data journalism as a tool to be used. Other places, IRE, Investigative reporters and editors. This is an organization I've been heavily involved with. They are doing, doing great work all over in training journalists how to do these kinds of stories and work. One of their subsets is NICAR, the National Institute of Computer-Assisted Reporting. And NICAR runs, tutorials, boot camps, various kinds of things, do training not only all over the country, but NICAR trainers have gone to countries all over the world to do this kind of training. In fact, I consider myself a NICAR trainer, so here I am doing that. Other good organizations, investigative reporting organizations in local countries or regions, things like VVOJ, in the Dutch Flemish investigative organization. They're at their conference in Antwerp a few months ago. They had training sessions on doing this. Scoop up in Norway is, again, another good investigative organization that is paying a lot of attention to data journalism. Finally, I'll mention this, the Global Investigative Journalism Network. This is the overview organization for all people who are doing investigative reporting. Every 2 years, they have an international conference someplace. A couple of years ago, it was in Kiev, and this October, it will be in Rio de Janeiro. So, good excuse to try to get to Rio, where not only will they be talking about other kinds of investigative reporting, but also having specific training sessions in data journalism. So, lots of great places to get that kind of help. I'll just mention some other publications. These are offered by IRE. If you go to the IRE site, ire.org, they have a library of various kinds of books, and these are a variety of the ones that actually help you talk about data journalism and so on. Okay. Did I use the right Italian word at least? Does that mean questions? I hope. No? Does it? Okay, good. Okay. Anyway, let's take a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any question they want to ask now before we go into the actual exercise where you get to play with some data? Good. I've explained it so carefully, everybody understands it. Great. Okay, let's take a look at some data. Let's see, is this working? Not so much. I don't know. Can you hear me? Fairly well. Okay, I'm going to see if I can show you what I want to show you here. Those of you who've been, yes, can't hear? Okay. Go ahead.
Excuse me. Near the microphone, please.
Use the microphone? Okay. I'll try to, is there a way we can turn this microphone on? Okay, that would help. Is it on now? Yes, perfect. Okay, that'll make it a lot easier. Oh, okay. If anybody has a question in Italian, I'll try and put that on, or somebody can translate it for me. Okay, let's, those of you who were able to go to the website that I talked about, let's pull up the Italy crimes data. Italy crimes. It'll look like this. Okay? Raise your hand if you actually have that data. Good. Okay, so a bunch of you do. If you don't worry about it. You can always get it later. And again, the tutorial that I have will walk you through doing the kinds of things we're talking about. So the first thing I always do when I open up a data set, a new data table, is figure out the questions that this data can answer. And I look at this and I say, okay, here are some questions that this data can answer. It can answer things like, what's the total number of murders that occurred this year in Italy? What's the total number of rapes, of car thefts, and so on? So those are totals. Other questions, which city has the most murders? Which city has the least murders? In addition, because I have population here, I can turn these raw numbers into rates. So I can look at the murder rate in different cities, and that way compare cities fairly. if I just do this, in fact, let's start out by doing this. Let's just sort this data. Click your cursor in the column that is murders. In column D, just click your cursor somewhere in there. Don't do this, okay? Don't select the column. And I'll show you why not to do that. That will actually be a problem. So put your cursor in the column, then go find the button. Depending on your version, it may look like this or whatever. In this version that I have, I just see the A to Z button, and then I press on descending because I want the worst to be up at the top. So I press there. Notice what it has done. It has gone through all these. In fact, we have a total of, how many? Hold on a second. We have a total of 106 different provinces. And we see that the province with the most murders is Napoli. Okay? Is anybody surprised that Napoli is up at the top of the list? Okay? I don't know. I don't know Italy well enough to know, but that clearly has the most murders. Okay? Let me show you a trick. One of the problems when I scroll down, notice that the variable names disappeared. But if you do this, put your cursors in cell A2. See where my cursor is? Let me make this bigger too. Does that help? Okay. So put your cursor in cell A2, go under Window, and then Freeze Panes. Okay? When you do that, now when I scroll down, the top row stays there. Makes it much easier to work with my data. Okay? So Window, Freeze Panes. Some versions you have to find particularly if you're using the ribbon view of Excel, there's something else that does that. But somehow or other it'll talk about freezing the panes. Okay. So we look at this. To move around in Excel, I'm on a Macintosh, so I can hold down the Command key and then tap the down arrow. Let's do this here. I tap the down arrow and it goes all the way to the bottom. So Command up goes to the top, Command right goes all the way over to the right, and so on. So that's a way to quickly move around. On a PC, if you're on a Windows machine, if you tap the End key and then tap the down arrow, the same thing will happen. Okay? So you don't hold down the End key, but you tap the End and then the down arrow. You will move around that way. Right now I want to add up the numbers for all of Italy. So I'm going to call this Italy here. I've skipped a row where I'm going to put this. I didn't do it directly underneath. The reason why is if I put the totals directly next to the numbers that are in there, when I sort, the totals will get pulled up into the sort. But by skipping a row, by leaving a blank row, these totals will stay down at the bottom. So let's do this formula now, this function. Anytime you do a function or math with Excel, you start out with the equal sign. Like this. It's hard to see up there. Let me see if I can make this. See that up here? The equal sign, like that. Okay. Okay, so I start out with the equal sign. Then I use, in the English keyboard, it's sum. If you have an Italian version, it'll be something else. What? Somma? Summa? Okay, so everybody use whatever is appropriate for the keyboard you have. Sum. Then we're going to add up everything from C2. I put in a colon, the two dots, and then the last piece, in this case, is C107. Okay, whoops, pardon me, C107. Okay? So everybody see the formula that I'm using there. I'm telling it to add up everything from the top down to the bottom. Pardon? Make it big again? Is it? Yeah, let me try that. Oops. Hold on a second here. Whoops. You see that now? Sum equals sum C2 to C107. And then when I hit enter, here it is, it adds it up. Okay? But again, here's the, whoops, let's go the other way. Here is the formula that I used. Okay. Let's make this so it looks right also. I'm going to use a format, cells, number, and I want the 1,000 separators, and I don't want any decimal places, so I'm going to go 0. Okay? So I tell it okay. Now it's easier to read. And I even use the European format for you guys. Okay. So here I added up that whole column. Now here's a trick. I could type the same thing under each of these columns as well. But now that I have that, I can put the cursor, which in data journalism we call the big fat white cross. Okay, that's a technical term. But when you put the big fat white cross on the bottom corner, it becomes the little tiny black cross. Okay, so now you know professional terms for this stuff. Little tiny black cross. Hold down the mouse key and drag across. And notice what it's done. It's taken our formula for column C, and when I moved it to the right, it turned it into a formula for column D and E and so on. Okay? So that quickly we can add all those up. Let's do something else. You know, we sorted by the number of murders, but again, we're not surprised because look, you know, it's mostly big cities that are up on the top with that. Is it really fair to compare the number of murders in big cities with the number of murders in small cities? We need to use rates, okay? So we're going to create a formula called crime rate. And anytime you create a new formula in a new column, always give it a title right away, just so you know what you're doing. So crime rate per, and I'm going to do per 100,000. Per 100,000 people. Now let me show you the formula. Okay? Once again, start with an equals sign. So I'm going to take the number of murders. I'm going to divide by the population. So it's equals D2 divided by C2. If I just did that, it would be the murders per person or murders per capita. And it becomes a very tiny number. We can't actually do that. So I'm going to now multiply times 100,000. Notice that you don't use a comma separator when you're typing in numbers for formulas. Okay? And everybody see my formula up there. I'm putting my formula, I'll show you. I'm putting it in this new column over here. Everybody see that? So I'm putting it in row 2 of my new column. You need to see it big again? Let me try to, okay, whoops, wait a minute. That help? Okay. So right up in row 2, I'm typing this formula. Once I put that in, I hit enter, and I'm going to, now let me back up here a little bit. And I don't want quite so many decimal places, so I'm going to turn it into this. So it's basically, what it's telling me is 2.3 murders for every 100,000 people in Napoli. Now, I only have to do that, 105 more times. Well, that obviously would be ridiculous. But what I can do, again, I can take the big fat white cross, put it, little tiny black cross here, and either do this, start dragging down, okay? Question? Is it possible to do it with what? Yes, and I'm about to show you that, but good, okay. Yeah, if you drag down, that's fine. If you only have a few dozen, dragging down will work fine. But sometimes you have 1,000, 10,000, and dragging would be a big problem. So instead, what you can do is put it there and, like he suggested, double click. Okay? And now we see actually quite a range of difference. This is good. You know, if your variables vary, then you have a story there, okay? So now I have the murder rate for each of these cities. I have taken into account the size of the cities. So now I'm going to sort by this in descending order. And whoa, instead of Milan being up at the top, or pardon me, Napoli being up at the top, I mean, it's still quite a bit. Anybody know where Vibo Valentia is? Okay. For whatever reason, a small area, 11 murders, but a very high murder rate, okay? In fact, it's, you know, it's substantially higher than any place else. Now, you know, is this where the local mafia chieftains live? I don't know. I have no idea about that. But you can see there's a big difference. At the other extreme, we're going to have some zeros. Yeah, here's a whole bunch of places, didn't have murders, so they have no murder rate at all, okay? This is how you can find stories. And if you were trying to do a story about, you know, the problem of murder in Italy, you can imagine taking this, doing this sort, and saying, I'm a reporter. I know where I need to go write a story about murders in Italy. Or what is it about that particular city? What is it about Vibo Valentia that has such a high murder rate? Why did so many murders happen there in what basically is a pretty small town? Okay? We can do the same kinds of things. In fact, let me show you another trick here. I'm going to delete all this, edit, clear. I'll show you something else here. We have, this is murder rate, pardon me, it's not crime rate, it's murder rate. Let's spell it right. But we can do rape rate and car theft rate, and finally drug rate. Okay. And in this case, I'm going to take this formula. I'm just going to add one additional thing. If I copied this to the right, like I did before on the sum, it would also change, not only, it would go from murders to rapes, which is what we want, but unfortunately population would change to murders, and we would wind up dividing rapes by murders, which produces, I don't know what it produces, but nothing useful. Okay, but to make it easy, I can go back to my formula, and if I put a $sign in front of the C, it anchors it. It'll keep it from changing. Okay, so watch now. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it over to here, and now I've calculated these rates. Notice it now says E2 divided by $C2, and F2 divided by $C2, and so on. Now I have all those, and I copy them down, and now I can look at each of these kinds of things. So we know that Vibo Valentia is worst in murder, but let's look at rape. Milano, okay, followed very closely by Imperia, and so on. Okay, hold on, let me tighten this up a little bit. Okay. And car theft. Somebody guessed Milan? Wrong. Barletta Andrea Trani. That is the place you don't want to own a car because you won't keep it very long, apparently. Okay? Very dramatic. And notice that also, this is all to me also interesting. The car theft rate in these two cities at the top is actually dramatically larger than even the next one down. You know? So there's clearly something different there. Yes, ma'am.
For those of us in the back, we can't see the text. Could you please zoom the page while you're doing the formulas?
Okay. So you can't see this part here, okay? Let's see if I can. The trouble is this zooming doesn't work very smoothly. You see up at the top here? So basically the formula for each one of these is the column, in this case column F, because we were looking at car theft, divided by C2, but I put a $sign in front of it. All that did was allow me to copy it across. You don't have to do that. You could have just typed in the correct thing. But I'm lazy. I always look for the easiest way to do it. So do you understand it now? Can you see it okay? You can't see it? Okay. Let's see here. It's about as big as I can make it up here. Okay, so you want to see why copying across worked that way. Is that the problem?
Yes.
Okay. The reason it works, in fact, let me show you what happens if you don't do what I just did. I'm going to erase these. Edit. Clear those. Okay. And if I don't put the $ in, I still get the same murder rate, but watch when I try to copy across. I start getting crazy numbers. And the reason, go away, Twitter. Okay. The reason why is because the formula, instead of being E2 divided by C2, because I moved over 1, the C2 changed to D2. You see what happens? So when you're copying across, it's going to change it unless you anchor. And so what I did was anchor it. So anyway, I can't take a lot of time on explaining that because we're going to run out of time to see other things here. So let me fix this back here. Okay. So anyway, the other way to do this, you could have just typed in the same formula. You could have just typed in E2 divided by C2 and copied that down, and then F2 divided by C2. That would have been a way to do it as well. So we looked at car theft. Let's just take a quick look at drugs, descending rate. And Imperia is the place with the either the biggest drug problem or the best drug police in terms of being actually able to find people who are selling drugs. I'm not sure which. Notice what we've done. In about 10 minutes of playing with some data that we downloaded from the Italy National Statistics site, we have found various kinds of stories that can be found. Each of these raise questions about possible stories that could be done looking at crime in Italy. So we've used sorting. Let me just show you some filtering. Let's say what we really want to see is just the region of Lazio. We're interested in that. So I'm going to go under Data, go to Filter. Again, see the little buttons that appear? And in this case, I'm going to pick this. I unselect all, and then I'm going to go down to Lazio. Everybody see that? I click Lazio, and now notice everything has gone away except the region Lazio. Notice also the rows. We're looking at row 7, row 26, row 36, 37, and 68. So everything in between has just been put away. It's still there. It hadn't been erased. It's kind of scary the first time you do it. But in this case, you can see that. So it lets you focus on just what you want to focus on. You can do other kinds of of filters. Let's say we want to look only at places where the drug trafficking is between 100 and 200 arrests. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could. So here I would do, instead of picking one of these select all, I would do choose one where the number of arrests is greater than or equal to 100 and less than or equal to 200. Okay? Pardon me. So now we see just the ones that meet that condition. So it's only, maybe 20 or 30 of them instead of all 106 of them. Okay? So that's filtering. And you can make filtering in other ways as well. You can filter. So I filtered by that. I'm going to go back and filter again. So I just look at Lazio. And we find there's only one region in Lazio that actually has between 100 and 200 drug arrests. Okay? So you can build even more complicated kinds of filters. Okay, let me turn off filters and now show you the other thing. Remember I talked about summarizing, where we have categorical data. In this case, our categories, our only category really, is region. Notice we actually have several, I think it's about 20 regions. I'm going to sort by this here. Sort by region. Okay. So now I've sorted. By the way, notice I did sorting a different way. Instead of putting my cursor in the column, I went up here under data and sorted using this tool here. Okay? And actually there's good reason for doing that. Sometimes you want to sort by more than one variable at a time. Let's say what I want to do, before I show you the pivot table, let's say what I want to do is sort first by region, then by, so I click this plus, I got region in alphabetical order, but then I'm going to sort by murders in largest to smallest order. Okay? So I do that. Now my regions are alphabetical, and within the regions I have, here in Abruzzo it's 6, 5, 4, 3 murders. And in Basilicata, 5 and then 1, and so on. So I've sorted within the regions by this. Now, if I wanted to get totals of each of the regions for murders, it would be slow and tedious to have to add these up, for each one, do this 20 times. But I can do this, which is called pivot tables. If you go under data, go down to pivot table, those of you who are following along, pivot table, and you just get this. All you have to do is say, OK. This will appear. Don't worry, your data hasn't disappeared. It's actually over here still on sheet 1. Okay? But we're now on sheet 3. So I know I want to do region as my row labels. So I take it and drop it here. And then I'm going to take murders and put it here in values. So that quickly, it went through all 100 of them, 107 of them, and summed it up by the regions. And I can even sort in descending order. So again, Campania had the highest number of them. You can make more complicated pivot tables, though I get a little nervous when they get too complicated because it's hard to see. But in this case, I'm going to take population also and drop it here in values. So now I get the sum of the murders and the sum of the population for each of these. And I could use that, in fact, to calculate murder rates by region. In fact, I'll do that. So I'm going to take number of murders, divide by the population. In this case, it's B5 divided by C5. I'm still going to multiply times 100,000. Okay. I'm going to turn this into a number. Copy down. And what we see is, again, a big difference by region. Let's see, is 3.7 the largest? Looks like it. You can't, if you calculate something outside of a pivot table, you can't readily sort it. You would actually have to copy all this to another sheet and then sort it. But for right now, we can see that this looks to be the highest, and then there are a bunch of others that are, way down below. Maybe the lowest is, 0.04? Somewhere down here seems to be the, near the lowest end of all this. Okay, so clearly the Calabria region, even though it doesn't have quite the most murders, has the highest murder rate, based on the size of its population. Again, just in this 15 or 20 minutes of playing around with the data, we see possibilities for stories. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to do the same kind of thing with the other data set. So I'm going to delete this. And let's put that away. We don't want that right now. And I'm going to pull up the Italy accidents one. Okay? Those of you who've downloaded, you should be able to do the same thing there. It looks very similar. In this case, we also have population, but now we are looking at the number of vehicles that were in auto accidents in 2011, the number of persons who were injured, and the actual number of auto accidents, again, by place, by, not region, but whatever, province, I guess, would be the right word for it, okay? So, again, I'm going to go to Window and Freeze Panes, so now I can scroll up and down. I'm going to calculate well, first let's look at the total number of accidents. Sort in descending order. Any big surprises? Rome and Milan and Torino have the most, though Rome is way ahead. Actually, when I had done one of these kinds of studies when I was in France, doing a look at auto accident rates in France, particularly fatal accidents in Paris, one of the interesting things, they had the most accidents, but they had the lowest fatality rate of all the cities. Why do you think Paris has such a low fatality rate in auto accidents? You can't drive, right. The traffic is horrible there. You know, at the worst, you can, bend somebody's bumper, but, in fact, everybody's going 5 kilometers an hour. It's hard to kill people there. Yes? Oh, good question. Okay. So let's calculate accident rates across Italy. So accident rate. Oops. Let's try spelling it right. Again, per 100,000. And let me just stack these up so there are various kinds of formatting things that you can do to make things look better. So I'm going to wrap text this way. Okay. And so once again, I'm going to take the number of accidents, which is F2, divide by, hold on, let me make this even bigger. I know. Let's make this so you guys can see it in the back. Okay, does that help? Okay, equals F2 divided by the population, C2, times 100,000. And get rid of some of those decimals. In fact, let's get rid of all of them. So basically what we're saying is 555 accidents for every 100,000 people in Rome. Let's copy that down. Let's sort in, again, descending order. And we discover that Rimini, where's Rimini? Okay. Highest accident rate. Certainly not the most accidents, but definitely the highest rate of accidents, at least based on population. I will add that one of the things that is kind of unfair about basing things on population is that population is only the number of people who actually live there. If you have places where people go for vacation, where you have tourists and so on, is that the case here? Right. Okay. There we have an example. I learned this in Miami, actually, back in the 1980s when Miami was the murder capital of the United States. I mean, we were having a murder a day going on in Miami in the mid to late 1980s. Shootouts in the street, all kinds of wonderful journalistic things happening. I was doing a story on crime rate and talking about how we were number one in crime rate in the country. And I called the mayor to get comment, and the mayor said, "Oh, that's unfair. We have tourists here all the time. You're not counting them." And I said, "You're right." So I figured out the number of hotel beds that were in Miami and how, what the occupancy rate was, and the number of people that go through the airport, and the number of people that go to the cruise ships. And playing with all that, I figured that on any given day, there was an extra 200,000 people in Miami that weren't being calculated into this. So I added them into the population, recalculated the rates, and we were still number one, but whatever. So, Yeah, and as I say, Miami, best city in the country to be a journalist in because of all these strange things that happen there. So, but here, we see that, and this probably is a case where you have a lot of tourists, a beach area perhaps. You know, the biggest crime in Portugal, where I just was, is down in the Algarve, and that's largely because of all the British tourists and expats who are down there drinking and carrying on and getting into trouble. So, and not being counted as a population. But let's look at another thing. Let's look at let's see, we have accidents, total accidents, and number of vehicles. Let's do the persons injured per accident. Let's see if that's anything interesting. Persons per accident. Okay. So I'm going to take the number of people injured, divide by the number of pardon me. Getting ahead of myself here, equals E2 divided by the number of accidents, which is F2, and getting, call it 1.4 people per accident, at least in Rimini. Whoops. And now let's copy that down and see if there's an interesting difference, and it may not be. It doesn't look all that interesting, but, well, it ranges from 1.9 in Crotone down to the other extreme, 1.2. So it's a bit of a difference. Doesn't seem all that exciting. Why is there almost twice as many people per accident? I don't know. More people are out driving with their family or something like that. I don't know. So anyway, we are down to 5 minutes left. You've seen at least some of the kinds of things that that Excel can do. You've seen that in less than half an hour, you can take a data set that has raw numbers, official government data. You can download it from the site, and by doing a little bit of this kind of analysis, you can see if there are things that might be worth doing stories on. You can also ask questions. You know, it's like this persons per accident. I'm wondering, is that going to be something interesting? I only had to invest a minute in writing a formula, copying it down and sorting it to discover, well, in this case, it wasn't so interesting. But if I had wanted to do that same kind of question without the computer, it could have taken me days to discover that it wasn't all that interesting. I might have had to call each of the provinces to talk to either the police or the emergency department in each of the provinces to get this kind of information from each one of them, and then write them all on paper and then do hand calculations. So all that could have taken several days to discover whether or not I actually had something good for a story. So the real power of using data journalism to find stories is it's a relatively low investment in time necessary to see whether you have a good story. Even something as complicated as the Hurricane Andrew thing that I was involved in, where we had to study all these, tens of thousands of damage records and millions of dollars in campaign contributions and so on. The data analysis portion of that project was the least time-consuming of all the rest of it. The time-consuming part was all the traditional reporting that had to be done. So I could use the data to tell us what the overall patterns were, and then our reporters had to go out and talk to people to find out why those patterns happened that way. So I guess I would add that data journalism doesn't take away the work of traditional journalism. It just becomes another tool that can perhaps more quickly help you find a story, but it doesn't replace actually doing the reporting and answering the questions of why that pattern exists. I've got nothing else to throw at you at this point. Any last questions? I know I did throw it at you. I can see the beads of blood on your forehead from trying to keep up with me. It really isn't as scary as I made it look trying to do it this fast, okay? What I urge you to do is, after you go from here, find a nice bar, have a good Peroni or something like that, take a deep breath, and at some point when you have a chance to breathe and do it, download the same data if you don't have it already in your computer, download the handout and kind of walk through it yourself. You'll see that it isn't that hard. The other thing about Excel is you don't have to know how to do everything with Excel to start doing interesting things, okay? So, for instance, I've been using Excel for 25 years or so now. I can touch type it. There's probably half of the things that Excel will do that I don't know how to do. I've never had occasion to. There's engineering functions and things like that. I've never learned them. All you need to learn is the things that you will use for journalism. So simple math, simple text functions, sorting, filtering, those kinds of things are very easy to learn. Last questions. Yes, sir.
Just to know, is it possible that there is a bug and sometimes when we have our calculation is not correct? And how can we double check it?
Good question. Okay, I'll repeat it here to you. Good question. How do you know if your calculation is correct? One scary thing about something like Excel, if you're using a calculator, it takes a whole bunch of keystrokes to make a mistake. But with Excel, you can make 10,000 mistakes with one keystroke. If you've done your formula wrong and you copy it down, Excel will say, heck with it. It'll give you the answer you asked for. In fact, that's a rule about computers. Computers do what you tell them to do, not what you want them to do. So remember that. But the way to know whether you've done it right is to be very conservative, to look at the answers that you're getting and say, does this make sense? Okay? It was like the questions I was asking. When you see that the highest crime rate is here, you look at it and say, does that make sense based on what you know? Is there any other place that you independently could find out whether crime was that high in that city as compared to another city, just as a way to check? Okay? It's even better if you have somebody else in your newsroom who also, let's say, is good with Excel. You can get them to look at your formula and make sure you calculated it right. There actually is quite a problem. A group, and this kind of problem can happen even with very well-educated people. There's two Harvard professors who a couple of years ago wrote what turned out to be a very influential paper that is being widely used by conservative politicians in the United States to argue that austerity is necessary. And their argument is built around a spreadsheet that they calculated showing that if the GDP rises to a certain level compared to debt, once it hits the 90% level, growth collapses. The problem is they made a mistake in their calculation. And so once the mistake was fixed on the spreadsheet, their whole premise disappears. Yet for 2 years, there have been a lot of political arguments in the United States about we must have austerity, same kind of thing you're having going on here in Italy. And it's based on a faulty spreadsheet. So don't be the journalist who makes that kind of mistake, but you've already got the right idea. If you are paranoid about your data, paranoid about the formula that you've written, so you double check it several times. You look at the answers that you're getting and say, does this make sense? And that's the best way you can do. I will add one other thing. Your answers are going to be only as good as the data you get, okay? And you can't always trust it. One data set that I downloaded actually from Eurostats is crimes by country across the European Union and other European region countries. And so I calculated crime rates. I was going to use it in there. In looking at that data, the country with absolutely the lowest crime rate, far lower than anything else in Europe, is Romania. Does anybody believe that? I'm not prepared to believe that either. Okay. In other words, we don't know how good the data collection is in Romania and maybe a couple of other places that show up. Greece also shows very low crime rate. Given Greece's problem in actually collecting taxes, I'm not wholly sure they properly collect the number of crimes either. So you have to be at least aware of the quality of the data that you're getting. And again, but you use journalism to look at that. You call up the people who are gathering the data, you ask them how they did it, you ask them if there are any flaws that they know of, and so on. And that's the best thing you can do. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, go drink that Peroni. You're out of here.
Just a quick reminder, if anybody would like certificates of attendance, Liliana and I are down here in the corner.
Yeah, I want one of those certificates too. So.
You can have a certificate. Our